Whoa, I have a story to tell. My name is Robin. I'm 27 years old and have been working as a marketing assistant. It's not a glamorous profession, but it keeps me afloat, sort of. I've been living at home with my parents, Susan and Mark, and my younger brother Tom for the past few years. Home is going a bit too far because our place is barely surviving. It's small, creaky, and almost always smells like something foul. I've always worked to improve it, though, because that's where I grew up. I'm referring to work. I buy the food, take care of a large portion of the expenses, and figure out how to fix anything that fails. You would assume that they would value that. Rather, I am simply the kid who never left. My mother has been saying, "Robin, when are you going to get a real job? It's always a tiny jab, like my work somehow falls short since I'm not a lawyer or a doctor. Despite my best efforts, it's never enough." Then there's Tom, who spends his days playing around on the computer and pretending to be enjoying the good life because he has a little following on social media. Hardly moves. But nevertheless, I'm the one who's not pulling my weight. If Tom is skilled at anything, it's coming up with creative ways to disparage me. I'm never quite enough for any of them, no matter how hard I try. You can only imagine how I felt when my 28th birthday arrived. In fact, I was anticipating it in spite of everything. Looking back, I realize how foolish I was, but I had a sliver of hope. Perhaps things would be different this year. I even went to a bakery that I had been saving money for and bought myself a nice cake. For once, I thought it might be wonderful to have a small celebration with just the four of us. I hesitantly mentioned it to my parents a few days prior. "Hey," I began nonchalantly, "I was thinking it might be nice to do something small for my birthday this weekend. Perhaps simply get together and share some cake?" My mother never even raised her head from her magazine. "We'll see, Robin." As if my birthday hadn't even registered, she continued, "We might have plans." In retrospect, it ought to have been my first hint. A stubborn part of me wanted to think that this time would be different, even though they never did anything for my birthdays. On the day of my birthday, I actually arrived at work with a little more energy. My coworkers were wonderful. They even gave me a card and planned a small celebration. I allowed myself to hope that perhaps things were finally improving. There might be a surprise waiting for me when I came home. Even if it was only a little card, or perhaps they had taken the effort to prepare dinner. Anything. However, my stomach fell when I turned into the driveway. All of my belongings were scattered in boxes and bags across the front yard, as if they had just chosen to take out the trash. My electronics, clothes, and books are all just sitting there, visible to everyone. With my heart pounding, I leaped from the car and hurried over. Before I looked up and saw my family standing on the porch, observing me as if this were some sort of bizarre family gathering, I had no idea what was going on. "What? What's going on?" I inquired, trying to speak steadily, but my voice was trembling. My mother came forward with a chilly look on her face. "Robin, it's time for you to move out." I felt as though the earth had been pulled out from beneath me. "You are no longer welcome here. Leave? On my birthday?" I looked at my dad, expecting him to say anything, but he just stared at the floor with his hands in his pockets and said nothing at all. "But it's my birthday," I choked out, barely keeping my composure. What am I meant to do? Naturally, Tom didn't pass up the opportunity to change the course of events. "Perhaps you ought to have considered that before being such a burden," he replied with a sly smile. Me. The person who had been paying the bills for months, who made sure there was food on the table, and who prevented this house from collapsing. It was very difficult for me to even answer. I turned to face my mother in the hopes that she would at least explain something. "It wasn't enough," she stated calmly. "That was all. We need the space, and you really need to mature." No pity, no hesitation, just a chilly rejection. To them, I was nothing. I wanted to scream and cry, but I refused to give them that kind of satisfaction. I forced myself to speak normally while swallowing the lump in my throat. "Can I at least grab my things?" She pointed to the mounds on the lawn and remarked, "They're already packed," as if it were inconsequential. "You should leave now. I suppose you should wish me a happy birthday." With trembling hands, I began packing my belongings into my car and piling one box on top of another. It was unbelievable to me. They were throwing me out on my birthday because of everything I had done. I gave it one last glance in the hopes that they would realize how bad this was and give me a call back, but all they did was stand there. No remorse at all. I made another attempt, speaking in a hardly audible whisper. "Why today? Why on my birthday? My mother didn't even bat an eye." With faux sorrow in her voice, she continued, "Think of it as a gift." It was independence. I climbed into my car, hands on the steering wheel, and drove away from my childhood home, leaving everything behind. I ended up spending my birthday alone in a small, musty room with nothing but my possessions piled up around me at a rundown little motel on the outskirts of town. I sat there looking up at the ceiling, wondering how my own family could be so unkind. On my birthday, no less. How could they have thrown me out? I vowed to myself as I lay on that rough motel bed that night that I would never again depend on them. No matter how difficult it became, I would get back up and solve this problem. The days after my birthday were a haze of rage, hurt, and an odd feeling of emptiness, since if they didn't care about me, I would have to take care of myself. I never imagined that my own family would be so unfaithful to me. Despite my anger, the anguish was too great to ignore. A persistent reminder that the people who were meant to love me the most didn't want me around. It was like a dull ache that wouldn't go away. They viewed me as a burden rather than as family. The morning following my disastrous birthday, I sat in that dilapidated hotel room and gazed at my image in the mirror. Looking back, I didn't recognize the individual. I was exhausted, swollen, and shattered. Even though I really wanted to hide in a hole, I realized it was not possible. I had a job to go to, expenses to pay, and I needed to decide what to do next. There was no room for self-pitying lies. I immersed myself in my work, which was the only thing that came to mind. It wasn't a glamorous job, but at least it kept me occupied. I arrived at work early, remained late, and took on any assignment I could find. I reasoned that the discomfort would soon begin to subside if I simply continued going and pressing forward. However, Hannah, my supervisor, isn't the type to miss much. When the office was almost empty one evening, she came over to my desk and sat down across from me. "Robin, you're going to burn yourself out at this rate," she remarked in a softer than normal voice. She saw the change in me almost immediately. "What's happening?" I didn't want to share my troubles with my employer, but something snapped when she gave me a sincere look of worry. Before I knew it, I was telling her everything: how I was now staying at a motel, how my family had expelled me, and how I had spent my birthday packing my car with stuff. Before it all came crashing out, I had no idea how much I'd needed to tell someone. Hannah listened to me without interjecting, simply nodding in agreement. She sighed deeply when I was done. "Why didn't you tell me sooner, Robin? I have a spare room at my house, although I realize it's not much. You are free to remain there till you recover." I was surprised by her offer. I wasn't used to people taking an interest in my issues, particularly in light of the recent events involving my family. "Are you serious?" Half expecting her to dismiss it as a joke, I asked. However, she simply nodded and grinned, saying, "Of course. I'd hate to see you burn out because you've been working so hard." I felt relieved and a little lighter for the first time in days. "Just tell me you'll take care of yourself." The following day, I moved into Hannah's guest room. Although it was a tiny room, it was far better than that motel because it was cozy, tidy, and felt secure. I sat on the bed that first night in her house, trying to process everything. Even though I was still in pain, staying with Hannah provided me the opportunity to begin putting my life back together, since I had a place to live, and someone who seemed to actually care. I continued to put in a lot of effort, taking on new tasks and saving as much money as I could. I also took up freelance work because I reasoned that the more money I could save, the quicker I would be able to locate a place of my own. Late nights became commonplace, and I often felt like I was merely going through the motions and barely surviving. I wasn't going to give up, though. My best friend Mike saved my life during this time. My new aim was to create a life without the assistance of my family. Even though we no longer lived in the same city, we had remained friends since we first met in college. He was incensed when I told him what had transpired. One of our calls ended with him saying, "I can't believe they did that to you." He wasn't incorrect, but hearing it aloud still hurt. "You deserve so much better." I said, "Yeah, well, it is what it is." The ever-joking Mike attempted to lighten the atmosphere by saying, "I just have to keep moving forward." You know what would genuinely irritate them? He laughed as he spoke. "You're getting really big and putting it in their faces." I chuckled, but the thought stuck in my head. It wasn't about retaliation, though it may have been. My main goal was to convince myself that I didn't require them. I could create a life for myself, independent of their oversight and criticism. That became my objective. Work harder, save more, and eventually move out of Hannah's guest room and into my own place. Things began to get better over the course of the following few months. I was gaining recognition for my work and gaining a larger clientele. Every late night and all-nighter began to feel worthwhile because I was earning more money than I had ever made. I was gradually demonstrating to myself that I could live without my family. Actually, without them, I was doing better. A few months after I'd moved into Hannah's guest room, she called me into her office one afternoon. The pain of what they'd done hadn't gone away, but it got easier to handle every day. I couldn't help but get excited when she smiled so broadly. "Robin," she said, her smile barely contained, "how does the title of lead designer sound to you?" Naturally, with a raise, I felt as though I were floating. "Are you serious? Half frightened that I was dreaming?" I asked. "Dead serious," she replied. "You deserve it. It's time we acknowledge the amazing work you've been doing." I was astounded. Principal designer, me. It was finally paying off after all the effort, stress, and restless nights. She simply smiled and said, "You're going to have a lot more responsibility now, but I think you're ready for it." I didn't care how difficult the job would be. I was still in shock when I managed to thank her. I had been striving for all of this. I finally had the financial stability I had long sought, thanks to my new job and the freelance work I had been accumulating. Knowing that I couldn't live in Hannah's guest room indefinitely, I started looking at apartments because, for the first time since that terrible birthday, I felt like I was actually in charge of my life again. Regaining my independence was the main goal of this promotion, not just the money. No one could take away my ability to make my own decisions and shape my own future. I felt liberated for the first time. After a few weeks of settling into my new position as lead designer, I began to feel as though things were finally coming together. I was moving forward, building a life on my terms, and it felt damn good. After working extra hours and saving every dime, I was finally able to afford my own place. Naturally, though, life has a way of upsetting you just when you think everything is going well. My family wasn't done with me yet. One random Wednesday afternoon, I was knee-deep in a project, laser-focused, when my phone buzzed. At first, I didn't pay it any mind, assuming it was just an email notification. But something made me glance at the screen. There it was. A text from Tom, my brother. I hadn't heard from him or my parents since they'd thrown me out, and honestly, I'd assumed we were done. I had no interest in reconnecting, especially after what they'd put me through. But curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the message. It was short and to the point. "Can we talk? It's about Dad." I read it a couple of times, my mind reeling. There was no way this was about Dad's well-being. If they really cared about me, they wouldn't have waited this long to reach out. My gut told me this was about money. I called him back, keeping my voice as neutral as possible. "Hey, Tom, what's happening?" I asked, already bracing myself. On the other end. He hesitated before answering, his tone softer than usual. "Robin, things have been rough at home. Dad lost his job and, well, Mom's spending is out of control. I'm at the end of my rope trying to keep up with everything, especially with my college bills coming in." The real reason for the call hit me right then. They were running low on funds and saw me as their ticket out. My family didn't miss me or feel guilty for what they'd done. They demanded a bailout. I bit my lip, trying back the impulse to giggle at the absurdity. "So you're telling me you're in a bind and now need my help, after you all kicked me out on my birthday?" I kept my voice steady, but my blood was boiling. He stammered, clearly caught off guard. "Look, Robin, we're family. You know how Mom is. She didn't mean it to go down the way it did. She just Well, she thought you needed a push to become independent, and now we're struggling, and we thought maybe you could help. I closed my eyes, trying to swallow the anger bubbling up. So, let me get this straight. I meant to bail you all out after being treated like garbage, booted out, and neglected for months? He paused, realizing how ridiculous it all sounded, then muttered something I could barely hear. Please, Robin. We just assumed, family sticks together. I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. Relatives? You mean the same family that left me homeless on my birthday? I don't owe you anything. He sat quietly without arguing, saying, You made your bed, now you can lie in it. I hung up before he could plead again. I felt stronger than I had in a long time, even if my hands were shaking. In order to convince myself that I could succeed, I had spent months reconstructing my life and working harder than before. They were in a difficult situation, so they were expecting me to reveal everything. That wasn't my problem anymore, though. That night, as I lay in bed and mentally reenacted the conversation, I felt as though everything was weighing heavily on me. I had to tell myself that they were the ones who had shut the door, even though I felt bad for abandoning them. They wanted a piece of my success now that I was finally doing well, even though they had treated me like a disposable item. I refused to let them bring me down once more. I returned to work the following morning with even more resolve. I concentrated on my tasks, pushed myself further, and never lost sight of my objective, obtaining a place of my own. My life was beginning to feel like it was really mine for the first time. My family's demands, criticisms, and manipulations did not define me. After a few more weeks of labor, the time arrived, and I wasn't going to let anyone take away my freedom. I signed a lease on a lovely apartment and had saved enough money for a down payment. It was everything I had ever desired: serenity, my own place, and not having to worry about anyone else's expectations. For the first few evenings, I sat in the center of my living room and enjoyed the silence. This is what I had done. Me alone. It seemed unreal. My doorbell rang a few days after I had moved here, right as I was beginning to get used to my new life. I thought it may be a parcel because I wasn't expecting anyone. However, I froze as I looked through the peephole. Tom and my parents were standing on my doorstep. I took a deep breath and answered the door, pushing myself to remain composed despite my racing heart and the sickening sensation that this was not going to be a nice visit. Before I had a chance to say anything, Mom forced her way inside and looked about my flat with this approving, critical look. With that all-too-familiar undertone of condescension, she added, "Well, Robin, you've certainly done well for yourself." Tom and Dad trailed behind, appearing less assured but just as intrusive. I crossed my arms and waited for them to say whatever it was they were going to say. "Why are you all here?" I questioned in a tense voice, and Mom turned to face me with a serious expression on her face. As though it were the most natural thing in the world, she remarked, "We're here to talk about living arrangements." I looked at her, trying to take in what she was saying. "Pardon me? Accommodations?" Dad cleared his throat, appearing more bashful than normal. "We decided it would be best if we all lived together once more, Robin. You have this lovely, spacious property, and things have been difficult back home." I laughed, not believing what I was hearing. "You left me to fend for myself after evicting me on my birthday, and now that you're having trouble, you simply want to move in? And I assume that I will also be paying the bills?" Mom crossed her arms, and her expression stiffened. "Robin, stop being so theatrical. Look at how nicely things worked out. We did what we believed was best for you. You ought to be expressing gratitude to us." I could feel my rage erupting. "You have no right to claim credit for my diligence. I worked so hard to get here, and I did it by myself. You can't just show up and take ownership of what I've created." Tom, still smug, added, "Come on, Robin, don't be selfish. We are related. We simply want to support one another." I shook my head, seeing the insolence in it. "Self-centered? Do you believe I'm being self-centered? Now, when I'm doing all right, you tossed me out with nothing and expected me to simply roll over and let you move in?" In an attempt to mediate the conflict, Dad took the initiative. "We're just requesting a chance, Robin. We thought it would be good to be together again, but things are difficult." With each word they said, I could feel my resolve growing stronger. "No, you have no right to make me feel guilty about this. You decided to eject me. I've decided to safeguard all I've worked so hard to achieve. If you need assistance, get it on your own." Mom's face changed, and I noticed a hint of rage. "Robin, we're family. We are the reason you have everything." I inhaled deeply and held my ground. "I owe you nothing at all. You have no right to come here and ask for my help." With a venomous tone, she stared at me and said, "You've made your decisions, and now you have to live with them. We'll take legal action if you want to be tough. You see, we have rights." I laughed, unfazed by the meaningless threat. "All right, Mom. You have no title to this house. It's mine." They stood there, staring at one another in startled stillness, and then they slowly filed out. "Now go." Leaning on the door to try to catch my breath, I shut it behind them. For the first time, I was not afraid or guilty, even though my hands were shaking. I was relieved. I had drawn the line, and I knew I would never allow them to cross it again. That evening, while I was sitting by myself in my apartment, I had a sense of calm that I hadn't experienced in years. No one, not even my family, could take away my life anymore. A peculiar peace descended upon me once I closed the door on my family. I'd allowed them to dictate my feelings, my self-perception, and what I believed I owed them for years. But I knew that was over as I stood by myself in my flat. Even though I was finally at peace, I knew that my family was still attempting to make things difficult for me. I had closed the chapter where their acceptance or disapproval defined me, and it felt better than I could have ever imagined. My friend Mike called me a few days after they arrived at my house. One of the few people who knew the entire tale was Mike, a lawyer. I assumed he had something significant to tell me when I saw his name on my computer, because he had been there for me through every twist and turn. "Hey, Mike, what is going on?" "Robin, I know things have been tough with your family lately," he began without wasting any time. I asked, trying to keep my tone casual, though I had a gut feeling this call was about my family. However, after doing some research, I discovered that they are having more serious problems than I initially believed. Problems with finances, taxes, etc. With the stress already beginning to return, I sighed. "They might try anything to get some financial support from you." "What are you saying? What plans do they have?" Mike hesitated, and I could hear him considering what to say. "They have no legal claim to anything you own, but people act irrationally in times of need. If they continue to turn up unexpectedly or insist that you owe them money, I believe it's necessary to take legal action to protect yourself." It felt terrible to consider going to that extent and suing my own family. I knew Mike was correct, though. I wasn't going to give them another inch, since they had already demonstrated to me that they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. "All right," I said, experiencing a peculiar mixture of resolve and melancholy. "Let's get it done. To prevent them from coming around, file whatever paperwork is required." The process wasn't as challenging as I had anticipated. The restraining order was initiated with Mike's assistance. It served as a kind of peace insurance that I could rely on in the event that they persisted. Things eventually calmed down once I came to the realization that sometimes, even though it hurts, creating hard boundaries is necessary for self-defense. I regretted that it had to come to this point. My workload was increasing, and I was giving my tasks my whole attention. I had just been promoted to lead designer by my boss, Hannah, and the duties were mounting. However, I discovered that I thrived under pressure, putting my all into every new endeavor with a sense of exhilaration that I hadn't had in years. I was gradually coming to terms with the fact that my life was now entirely mine, but naturally, my family didn't let it go easily. I began to hear rumors that they had been circulating false information about me, claiming that I had abandoned them when they needed me most. They portrayed me as ungrateful, cold-hearted, and self-centered. I wanted to correct these accusations, since I knew they were getting to friends and even some family acquaintances. I called Mike once more to seek his counsel, because I wanted people to know the truth about how they had treated me. What should I do? People I hardly know are messaging me to question why I refuse to assist my family. As usual, Mike spoke calmly. "I want to tell them what really happened, that they threw me out, and now they're just trying to use me. You owe no one an explanation, Robin. The truth is known by those who truly matter. Let your deeds, not your words, do the talking." It was difficult to follow his counsel, but I knew he was correct. "Your relatives will continue to speak, but eventually the truth will out. I didn't have to defend myself to anybody. After years of going above and beyond to satisfy my family's expectations, I decided it was time to concentrate on my own life and create something of which I could be proud. My life continued to get better every day. I developed my talents, acquired new friends at work, and began taking up activities I had never had time for previously. To make my flat feel very unique, I spent weekends shopping at neighborhood markets for furniture and decor. I felt more like the person I'd always wanted to be as each month went by. One evening, while I was sitting by myself in my apartment drinking tea and watching the city lights flicker outside my window, I experienced an overpowering sense of calm. I came to the realization that I was no longer waiting for anything, not for my family's acceptance or for things to improve in my life. It was already better. Mike gave me another call a few weeks later. He seemed positive as he said, "Robin, got some news. Your family's financial troubles overtook them. It turns out that they are currently catching up on some significant tax debts. Additionally, you may rest easy because they are no longer permitted to contact you." I experienced a strange mixture of comfort and despair at hearing that. Although I didn't enjoy their problems, I was glad to be out of their grasp and free of the cycle of responsibility and guilt. I had chosen my path, and they had chosen theirs. I felt genuinely free for the first time, unencumbered by their control over my life, their manipulation, and their expectations. I worked hard to build my own life, and it felt real and substantial. I knew I would never allow someone to take that away from me again. The ensuing weeks were jam-packed with further professional accomplishments and minor triumphs in my personal life. I got up every day eager to start something new and create the life I had always dreamed of. Even though it had been challenging, I felt that I had made the right decision with each step I took ahead. In hindsight, I saw that deciding to let go of my family wasn't about leaving them behind, but rather about choosing myself. I had finally learned how to make my own decisions after they had made theirs. And the best gift I could ever offer myself was the freedom to live my life as I saw fit.